talking about federal aviation regulations. Before we go on a break at the top of the hour here, I want to talk a little bit about the changes that, in the process of the changes that are coming out, or basically are out, and they're actually published. It's just they go into effect basically in a day and a half. So this is the format of kind of what transpired recently, and it's kind of a longer process than this, but the FAA published some new regulations on January 15th of this year. And from the time that they publish the regulations to the time that they become available is roughly about a 45-day period. Okay. So they actually became available at the beginning of this month. So March 1st, the new regulations became available for the purposes of training. So in the event that you are a current licensed pilot, for a remote pilot that is, and you took your training prior to March 1st, the new rules and regulations with the allowance where you can fly at night, and then also over human beings, that is, if you take the training on the FAA website, faasafety.gov, you'll then gain those new privileges and limitations when they become available to you in the next couple days. Then what we've got is on March 16th, all of these new regulations that we'll be talking about, including flying at night and then also over people under certain circumstances, you can actually, put those into effect here in just about a day and a half. So the new regulations that we have are previously you can only fly during the day, but now night operations are allowed. There were some limitations over operating over vehicles and then over people as well. So those have changed, and we'll talk about those. There's a new regulation out there talking more specifically about the FAA Remote ID. And primarily with the Remote ID, this is kind of a tracking system. It's going to take a couple years for this to go into effect, but we'll talk about what it is and how it applies to you. And it's pretty much going to be a larger deal for the manufacturers because they need to adjust a little bit so that way they can attract or they can track all of these drones that are being created. So the remote pilot knowledge test will include these. So as of March 1st, these new regulations that came out will be included on your knowledge test or your FAA written test, that is. So keep that in mind, that the final rule when we look at this is also going to replace the in-person recurrent training every 24 calendar months. So in the past, what ended up happening is once you get your remote pilot license, every 24 calendar months, you had to renew it and take another FAA exam. Okay. The nice thing about this is that you're going to do it, but you're going to do it online for the renewal, and it's free. So once you're done with this class and you take your official FAA written exam, in about 2 years from now or 24 calendar months, when you need your basically recurrent training, you're just going to navigate over to this website, faasafety.gov. They have an online digital course that is of no charge to you, and you'll be able to take that recurrent training online. Okay, so that's kind of a new nice thing as well. All right, and then we will be talking about the aviation or federal aviation regulations. So remember, just like in anything with aviation, there's a lot of different rules out there, and the rules obviously are written down. So unfortunately, though, some were written by lawyers, which means that they are a little bit convoluted, and you have to take a minute or two to figure out exactly what they say. And then there's some that are actually fairly straightforward. So the Federal Aviation Regulations, like I said, Title 14 or 14 Code of Federal Aviation, Federal Regulations, which is this portion right there, is really just the section that applies for, NASA and the Federal Aviation Regulations. Within that, you can pretty much cross out 14 CFR and just look at the part numbers. So everything that we're going to be talking about is going to be under Part 107, and we have then subparts of that Part 107. So the subpart A is our general information. So this is going to be terminology, things that we need to know. How do you define a remote pilot? How do you define a few different terms? And we'll go into those. We have subpart B, which is our operating rules, which is going to describe the rules governing how we can actually operate these devices, SUASs, which are small. S is for small. Subpart C, which is remote pilot certification. How do you become a remote pilot? What are the conditions of issuance? What are your privileges and limitations? Meaning what can you do and what can you not do? And then what do you need to do in order to maintain your knowledge, right? Then what we have is subpart D is the new subpart. It actually used to be called waivers, but subpart D is now operations over human beings. And this is going to basically describe those rules in detail. They will break the drones into 4 different categories and effectively tell you, based upon the weight and the capabilities, what are you going to be allowed to do with your drone when we're flying over people or not. And then finally, the new subpart, which is subpart E or Echo, is now going to be waivers. So a lot of the things that we're going to talk about that say, hey, you can't do this. You can't fly over 100 miles an hour. You can't fly over 400 feet. You can actually apply for a waiver from the FAA in order to request, on a case-by-case basis, to basically go around or get an exclusion from that regulation moving forward. Okay. Now, after the break here, we will not go in this specific order. I will usually start off with subpart A, which is going to be some terminology. Then we'll talk about the remote pilot certification. So there's 2 different ways to get your certification. Basically, if you're taking this class, most of us here probably have never been in an airplane, don't have a pilot's license. So all of this is brand new to us. So that's one. And then we'll talk about the folks who do have some type of FAA license. And then you also have a kind of a different path to follow as well. So we'll talk about both of those.